Hello and welcome for all of you who are watching. You're tuned into TMH's English Daily News. As we move on to our headlines for today, the Ethiopian government and Tigray's ruling party signed a permanent cessation of hostilities agreement, and Tigray has called for the immediate implementation of the permanent cessation of hostilities agreements to partake. Moving on to the South African peace talks, the Ethiopian government and the Tigray's ruling party have signed a permanent cessation of hostilities agreement. These two sides signed the agreement today in South Africa after over a week of intense negotiations led by the AU high-level panel. Let's take a listen. Chair of the panel, former Nigerian President Olusegun Obasanjo, during a press briefing to declare the agreement, said that the two sides have formally agreed to a permanent cessation of hostilities, to systematic, orderly, smooth, and coordinated disarmament predicated on the security situations in Tigray, restoration of law and order, restoration of services, unhindered access to humanitarian supplies, protection of civilians, especially women, children, and other vulnerable groups, amongst others. Obasanjo added that the agreement also takes care of assurance of security for all of the concerned within and outside Ethiopia. Let's take a listen.
This moment is not the end of peace process, but the beginning of it. Implementation of the peace agreement signed today is critical to the success of the process.
Answering questions by a journalist on what the sticking points were in the course of the negotiations, former Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta said the principles of the peace talks, the return to the constitutional order, integration of Tigray to the federal government structure, disarmament, humanitarian access, and resumptions of services were some of the key issues. Kenyatta emphasized that the devil is in the implementation and underlined that the unwritten issue of trust and resolving differences internally within the Ethiopian context is the most important part. The monitoring, supervising, and verification of implementation will be carried out by the AU high-level panel. Leaders of the two negotiating teams signed the agreement, on which members of the AU high-level panel also signed. The UN, the IGAD, and the US were observers in these peace talks as well. Tigray calls for the immediate implementation of the permanent cessation of hostilities agreement. Leader of Tigray's delegation at the peace talks in South Africa, Getachew Reda, in his remarks during the signing ceremony, expressed his hope and expectations that the two parties will in fact continue to honor their commitment and redouble their efforts to make sure the agreement that they have signed is implemented in a manner that satisfies the interests of all the parties involved. Getachew highlighted the ongoing dire humanitarian crisis, stressing that thousands of combatants from both sides and civilians are losing their lives even as the agreement is being signed today. Let's take a listen.
So it is incumbent upon us not only to sign this agreement, but also to make sure that it's immediately implemented and the follow-up activities that are required to make sure such an agreement is implemented to the fullest extent possible are carried so in earnest. And on our part, we are ready to do everything in our capacity to expedite the implementation of this agreement And it's our hope and expectation that our brothers from Addis Ababa will do the same.
He expressed hope that the verification and monitoring mechanism that will be put in place will be an ironclad one. He also added that the international community will throw its weight behind such a process so that there won't be any relapse in what he called the kind of traditional proclivity to the resolving and of differences by shooting at each other. Getachew Reda, talking of spoilers from nearby and in the neighborhood, this is what he had to say.
I know there are spoilers from nearby, from inside our ranks, from the neighborhood, and we also know they would not stop at nothing to sabotage our peacemaking efforts, and it is only through our collective resolve that we can hold these spoilers in check.
Getachew Reda noted that making peace obviously has proved more difficult and more intractable and more elusive than presiding over the killing of women and children and the destruction of property. He noted that the war has been imposed on the people of Tigray and that it has claimed the lives of hundreds and thousands of people in the last 2 years.
The war in our part of the country, the last 2 years, has claimed the lives of hundreds of thousands of people and has turned Ethiopia, once in the cusp of great economic progress, into a bad parody of itself and caused tremendous suffering to the people of Tigray. Our people have been killed not only through bullets, but also for lack of food and medicine. Our children do not go to schools. Our hospitals are not functioning because of the war. We have always felt this war was imposed on us, and we have always been ready to do everything in our power to stop this war.
Reda added and said his side has made concessions because addressing the pains of the people is far more important than the kind of consciousness concessions made that is key to build the trust. He stressed that the signing of the agreement will come as a relief not only to the people of Tigray, but also to the entirety of the Ethiopian population. That concludes our news for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Bye-bye.